Hull would have won. That's what everyone on the internet is saying. All the Hull fans are saying Hull would have won if the player hadn't been sent off, and despite the fact they lost by 26 points to Warrington. Now, I remember Hull the week before against Kingston Rovers, and they were rubbish. So they were slightly better this week. I think slightly is a bit unfair. They were better this week.
Yeah,
they looked much better,
had a lot
more
of spirit,
competitive.
Yeah,
but
I think there was more in that performance for Hull fans to take out of than the week before, for sure. I mean, I know they are obviously a massively disrupted, depleted team, but they showed spirit in their performance,
absolutely.
you know. And okay, look, it ended up with
it blew out late on that.
Yeah, you know, the incident with the red card, but you know that as we talked about last week, that doesn't directly. That's not the single determining factor in the result. It's an influence in potentially the outcome.
It could have been 6-6 at half time without that, because they wouldn't have kicked the penalty, and then it would have been 13 men against 13. The likelihood is it would have been a closer result, but I think we'd seen enough to know that Warrington were going to win that game.
There's almost
so it didn't determine the outcome.
No, there's almost nothing to talk about with the incident. So now I'm going to refer to it forever as if it's some kind of major, terrible thing that happened. Just because everything's changed now. This is the advantage of doing the programme on a Monday rather than a Sunday. MRP's out, everyone's unhappy about something else. But as it turns out...
I only have one question, which again, my learned friend will be in the best position to answer.
I'm not sure if I am.
Well, certainly more than we are.
So it's Kaplan of the Bailey now. Is this where
I put it to you.
Yes.
The briefing we went to about how the games are going to be refereed this season, about the sanctioning plan, about the various categories you need to go to decide an incident. I thought that New Brown would have been yellow carded, because we were quite clearly told by Robert Hicks that it's the responsibility of the tackler to not get their head in an area where it comes into contact with the ball carrier. Whether that's intentional or not, that was going to be how it was going to be sanctioned. So I thought, well, clearly, whether he meant to do it or not, Ben Currie's had his eyebrow split open. There's clearly been contact with the head. Video review shows that it's come from New Brown's head. Oh, we'll get a sin bin in, because that's the framework we're playing under. The bit I didn't understand was when it comes back to Marcus Griffiths on field, that it's forceful and there is no mitigation, because that puts the on-field referee in an absolutely impossible position. But why would whoever viewed that have thought that clearly there was no mitigation and it should be deemed forceful, when all we could see was there was a slight turn of Ben Currie in the tackle? New Brown's sort of got his head up, yet he doesn't try to adjust. Why was that coming from the video referee? And that's a rhetorical question, because you don't know, because you weren't the video referee.
There's a couple of things in that. One, in terms of where one would assume, and I don't know because I've not heard the audio, but one would assume that wording has come from the video referee, because that appears to what have happened in round 1 and round 2 of the incidents we've seen so far, that the player is brought out by the referee and he sort of reels off a list, which is whether something is direct or otherwise, whether it's forceful or otherwise, high level, low level of force, whether it's any mitigation or aggravating factors, and it's kind of what we discussed last week. And that must have come from the video referee, is my opinion. But the main question I have, and I don't have the answer, is what is the framework that is being worked to? We talked about it last week, and that was me making observations of those interactions between a referee and a player who's about to be dismissed or yellow carded, as to a possible framework that they're working to. But I still think with the press release that's been brought out today, and Robert's words on that it refers to a head contact framework. But what is the framework? Where is the framework? Can we see the framework? Now, if it's there and it's on the RFL's website, then great. But let's have a link to it, and maybe I should go and have a look on the website. I don't know, maybe I've not found it. I don't know. What I'm trying to say is, I think you need to have transparency, and so everybody is aware of what that framework is, as opposed to trying to work out what the framework is. That's not to say, by the way, that ultimately I felt it was a wrong decision on the night. I didn't think it was a sending off. And there always, in my view, there was always going to be a statement to be released following that game. Whether that was the day after, probably not, because of the World Cup Challenge. It's followed on the Monday. And I think, I won't use I was going to use the phrase common sense.
What is common sense?
Yeah, exactly.
For more details and examples, search the Rugby League website.
Oh, I'm trying to do that, but I've broken it. And also found the whistleblower form, so I'm going to dob in all my media people I don't like.
Well, then maybe I need to go away and do that. And if that's
But
the case, then
I
that's fine.
thought
But
it was a mistake from on high. There was nothing on field that indicated that should have been the outcome. And
the examples that I've seen on head contact, and by the way, head-on-head contact was always going to be the most controversial
Yes.
of any incident. And we haven't seen one in round one. We did, but it wasn't noticed on the field. There was a ban in round one. I think it was Tom Amoni, from Lee, was banned for a head-on-head contact. Now that example on that game was the kind of example that I've seen or understand has been shown to sort of referees and clubs and players, where it's an initial impact, where the defender is stood in an upright position against a ball carrier in an upright position, and their heads clash immediately.
And there's no adjustment.
No,
made.
and that's why it's led to a tweak in the interpretation on the head contact framework. Rightly so, that they're now saying if it is initial contact, that's what will be sanctioned. New Brown wasn't on initial contact. There was contact, but it didn't come initially. So he would argue, well, he tried to avoid contact, and he did. And it was only the circumstances of the tackle that ended up where his head met.
I think the other
Currie's
thing
head.
that Tony Smith said in the aftermath that I hadn't considered but needs to be a mitigating factor is the state of the pitches, with the greatest respect to groundsmen or women who were doing a fantastic job in horrendously wet conditions. But if you can't plant your feet, that's a mitigating circumstance that the tackler is occasionally going to get in the wrong position.
It is.
I don't think New Brown slipped into that particular tackle, but that's not written in the framework either. That a mitigating factor might be you can't change your body position.
There's probably...
And maybe he said, "Oh yeah, I could see that. I was getting close to the guy's head, but I couldn't move because my feet were encased in mud."
But again, I would ask, is it in the framework? Because I don't know. I've not seen the framework. That's the point I'm trying to make. It might be in the framework.
I don't
we
think
don't know.
conditions are.
No, but we talk about dropping of height and being a mitigation for a ball carrier. If a ball carrier drops in height, we talked about it last week with Dupree, didn't we? Ball carrier drops in height, then that's mitigation.
Yeah.
But what about mitigation the other way, where, as you rightly say, if a defender slips and dramatically slips into contact, then it's inevitable that there's going to probably be an outcome off the back of that.
There were a couple of incidents this week, and we must say last week 13 players got charged. This week I think it's 6. So again, I know, and we've had one last game, so that needs to be taken into account.
And the Huddersfield St Helens game, barely a penalty in that game for high tackles or anything.
There were a couple of things. One is London have had no cards, no disciplinary issues. London have conceded more points and done more defending than any team in Super League.
Some would say they probably missed more tackles than other teams, but I'm not trying to be harsh.
But it can be done.
But you're right. You make a fair point. They've defended probably more than others.
If you thought that there was going to be a team at the top of the sanctions list, you would think it would probably be the team that's making the most tackles, conceding the most points, doing the most defence, would be tiring more than other teams because they're not used to playing at that level and intensity, and they've been so far squeaky clean. I think the only issue I would have is we're seeing some head contact that isn't being picked up. So in that Hull Warrington game, Liam Sutcliffe is quite rightly denied a try because the defender gets under him, but he's been hit round the head as he tries to ground the ball. So to me, I was expecting no try, penalty to Hull, but we didn't get that head contact. Now again, you are gonna miss some, but that's one that the video referees looked at.
Well,
again, why did we not go back and say clearly you're right, he's held up, but check the head contact?
I mean, bluntly, the 2 incidents on that game in relation to tries were a mess, actually. That should have ended up in a penalty, but it comes back to the video referee protocols, in that the video referee can only intervene on incidents that merit either a red or a yellow card. Now, ideally what should have happened on the field was, when it's referred, the referee will say, look, I'm checking for a try and my live decision is no try. If it is no try, I'm going to come back for a penalty for a high tackle.
Which actually could have been yellow carded.
Yeah, and I think having said all that, even though it wasn't referred on field, I think again there has to be a process in place whereby that is identified somehow, and we end up with the right outcome. The right outcome should have been a penalty, in my opinion, for contact with the head. Now, whether that's taken further, that's a different question. But for me, it should have been at least a penalty.
And I think the other thing about players need to take an element of responsibility in all this, which is something that you've said, is when Matty Ashton makes the break that led to the penalty try, Tex Hoy has all of him to aim at, and he aims at the head. You know, that's what players need to. I'm not saying, you know, just having a go at Tex Hoy. I'm just saying that when players are in that position, their initial instinct has to be to go lower. And again, because it was a penalty try, was probably the double jeopardy reason why Hoy didn't get signed in. But he should have been.
Yeah, but to be honest, as a tackle technique, I mean, I've never tackled anybody, so you know, it's not for me to teach it.
The combined tackle count of the three of us is 0.
Yeah, I wouldn't have said that going up high necessarily in that position will always reap the rewards. Yeah, you'll want to probably get ball and all and tackle, wouldn't you, and throw him into touch, but he doesn't necessarily need to go that high. And clearly, the first impact wasn't high, was it? It was shoulder and up. So, you know...
But I think you've got to aim lower in the current era.
Yeah, but I don't disagree. But the tackle height ruling has not come in and won't come in until next year. So, but it probably wasn't identified on field, was it? Because a penalty was being given for a late challenge. We then end up with a video referral rather inexplicably, which I can only assume was because the referee viewed it on the screen, and we ended up with a referral. It was all a little bit of a mess, to be honest.
We'll see what happens after the big meeting between the players and... Who is the captain of Salford?
But is it the 12 captains that are meeting?
Just 12 random rugby league
or
players?
Are we having 12 representatives meeting the RFL on Wednesday and 12 captains under their own steam meeting on Thursday?
I mean, we don't know who from the RFL is going to be on this Zoom call, but I hope they say to him, are you going to stop cheating then and feigning injury and laying down longer than you should be, and you know, all that kind of thing. I hope they do. It'd be quite funny. Why have we got this theory now that players' previous disciplinary shouldn't be taken into account when they go to the disciplinary?
It should.
And there's now a conspiracy.
If you go to court for any civil offence, it's taken into account.
There's
when
a
it comes to
conspiracy
sentencing.
at the Rugby Football League. There is a conspiracy at the match review panel against Michael McAlorum and Liam Watts.
Yeah,
I can't believe it that these two gentlemen, who fine, upstanding individuals that they are, apart from when they're on the...
Do you think Michael McAlorum's a bit upset that the Catalan fans didn't start a GoFundMe page for his fan?
I tell you what, you know, you can do whatever you want with your money. I buy rubbish. I mean, I've had this year, so that's okay. But got a signed French wheelchair rugby league shirt now. What am I going to do with that? But at least I've got a tangible item there, as opposed to paying someone's fine who was naughty.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing I would say on last week's charges that then related to the disciplinary the following night is that there were a number of downgrades, weren't there? Which
undermines.
Well, look, there's a process and they're independent of each other, and so what it shows is that they are independent of each other. But what it also shows to me is that there is uncertainty around the application of the framework, because you've got differing outcomes from Monday to Tuesday, and there will be occasions where that happens, but there were quite a number of downgrades. So, the work that will have gone on in the off season between the disciplinary, the match review panel, and the match officials, it's not quite working at the moment. I think there were always going to be issues in the first few weeks of the season,
like there is in every season.
It is, and I do hope in the next few weeks it will settle down. So,
well, I think the players will become more averse to what they're actually being penalised for. And again, you'd have to do a comparison if you could really be bothered between the number of penalties in each round as to whether it's getting less or not. But the feeling is, just by watching it, that there were less incidents in round 2 than there were in round 1, which is illustrated by there are less people in front of the beak this week.
Yeah, and I think that's fair.
So that's part of the adjustment period for everybody.
Do we, brackets the media, have a responsibility not to glorify things by having counts of cards week by week and saying, look how many people have been sent off this week?
I have a lot of time for Brian Carney, and I think virtually everything Brian Carney says is from a point of absolute reason and can be justified. I thought that both he and John Wilkin went a little bit over the top at half time in the
He's
Warrington,
never coming on this podcast.
saying that the game was having an existential crisis. And I think that's where the media sometimes needs to take a step back and say, right, let's explain the context around which this decision is made, and then let's just talk about whether we think it's the right decision. But if you're going to stand on the touchline at half-time and basically say the game is in crisis because a decision is wrong, it shouldn't have been a red card, then I think you're setting the whole almost agenda for how people are going to react to that, which is one of the reasons we had the media briefing, and John Wilkin very kindly provided the pastries for.
Leeds in crisis.
He was there.
Bring that back. He was there. I've never seen him.
So I get that they're upset by the decision, but I think we also have to be a little bit responsible in the current climate about saying we can see why a decision is being made.
Yeah.
We don't understand. We don't think this one is right.
Well,
But if you start talking about the game's gone, then all of the people who think the game's gone, I've got.
I don't think they use that phrase, which is an odd
it's
phrase. But
existential
you're right.
crisis
Yes,
is the game's gone.
I had to Google that to
in
spell
posh
it properly.
language, isn't
I
it?
couldn't spell it.
Yeah, I think they were also frustrated, weren't
They
they? They
were,
were frustrated.
and understandably
and it was
so.
in the moment, in that,
Yeah.
I appreciate it wasn't, they'd had a little bit of time to think about what they were going to say.
But I think we just have to
Yeah.
be careful about how we contextualise all of this
But
at the moment while it settles down.
We go back a few years, I don't know how many years now, I was video referee on the game that probably led to the change when we were issuing a lot of yellow and red cards in the early part of the season. I think it was Wigan against Castleford. I can't remember the Castleford player now, but I recommended
Not
a
Wigan
sin
and
bin.
Castleford again.
Yeah, I think I recommended a sin bin to Chris Kendall, I think was the referee. And I thought I was doing the right thing in accordance with our protocols and interpretations, only to be told the following week, no, it was the wrong thing. So, at that point in that season, we did an about turn as referees, and we sort of backed down, as it were. I don't think we'll see a backing
There
down
won't be
here.
any backing down on head contact.
No, there will be no backing down here. There's been a tweak made on this particular thing, and rightly so.
Which actually reflects well on the sport, that it can make that change.
Well, I think so.
And I think the cleaning up of the play of the ball is starting to work as well, that more players are actually being seen to make the effort to stand up and play it correctly.
Definitely.
And those who don't are getting penalised for it.
Yeah,
And they can protest as much as they like, but most of them, it's a failure of technique.
Yeah, well, we talked about that last week. You can change habits, and you can change some habits, certainly, quickly. And that for me, for one, having seen quite a lot of games now, that has almost dried up overnight, really. Now, that relies on referees to stay on it and not back off on it, or not miss the odd one where it occurs. But, as far as I can see, the players are really sort of bought into that. And I think we are seeing some benefits, because I think the rucks are generally tidier.
Yeah. I think the ball's in play more, and that can only be good.
So we're not going to start playing touch and pass in a couple of years, as people keep saying. I'm not having tig and pass. No one calls it that. Only wrong people call it tig and pass.
But we don't have any
Like
choice.
Express.
That's the other thing.
No.
But also, the game will evolve. The way in which the game
Always
will be
evolve.
played will probably slightly change. And I think there were comments made over the weekend. I don't know which coach it was that was sort of saying, actually, we might end up with a more open, free-flowing game.
We will when the
because
weather,
we've tidied up the ruck.
as the weather gets better. We will.
We're reducing tackle height or whatever, or we're penalising, certainly this season, the tackle height a little bit, perhaps stronger and stuff. That we might see a return to, dummy half players, etc., whatever, offloads and all that. So, the
Kick
game
some
will
throws.
change. We've had probably a period of...
I know we haven't talked about the Castleford-Salford game yet, but there was a lot of offloading in that game. Probably more than we've seen in games at this time of the year when, the pitch was firmer, but both two teams that wanted to play a progressive style of rugby league that promotes the ball, and the new laws help them to do that. And it's a much better spectacle for the neutral.